Okay, and welcome. This is the Blue Pencil session here at the Creative Academy. I am Eileen Cook, and these are my two fine colleagues, Donna and Crystal. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We're going to be talking today about Bonnie's piece, which is a middle grade historical fiction, Esther called Maria. Just to give people a little bit of grounding before we start talking, this is historical middle grade. And in the story, it opens up, we have the main character, Maria / Esther, who's in the town square, and she's confronted by a woman who seems to be trying to figure out whether or not she's still a practicing Jewish young lady. She's able to get away from that woman, and then we see her at home where she's preparing a meal and doing some dishes with family. So let's get us started off on page 1. Ladies, any thoughts?
I liked the way we start off and just kind of drop right into the action. And we start off with a question, which is often very effective to kind of to pull us in immediately. I had a question actually, which is kind of a craft question. I wasn't sure to highlight it or not highlight it, but Eileen or Donna, I'm hoping you can answer this. So first person, it's still a thought. The first line is, what is the blacksmith doing in the square so early in the morning? It's not a market day. And it's not italicized, and this is just a tiny little thing, but from a reading flow, when it's first person, do you still italicize your thoughts as opposed to actions?
So for me, it becomes one of those weird things where I should look this up because I'm going to say this and I don't actually know the rule. In this case, I would not italicize it.
Okay.
Why?
Donna? I think, well, partly because it's the first thing that we're starting off with, and I feel like it's going to throw the reader off.
Fair enough.
That would be my biggest reason for that.
Right.
Yeah. Just curious.
Interesting. It's funny. I looked at that and I made an assumption because when I wrote first person and I always italicized the thoughts, but had I not, it would have been confusing. It really would have been confusing in my story. I was never confused when I was in her thoughts when they weren't italicized. So maybe it's
yeah.
I like, so the chapter 1 starts and it dates us. First 1536 Christian calendar and then 5296 Jewish calendar, which immediately, because I love nonfiction and because I like to do the research and stuff, I loved that. That was kind of like I've got the two contexts. I know that right from there that we're going to be comparing something that's religious, which I also find really interesting. The one thing though, I don't know what a swag hammer is, or maybe it's a swage hammer. I don't know what that is. And I don't know what the square looks like. And I'm curious, and I don't know what it smells like in 1536. In that, I loved though, so I wanted a tiny bit more context in there, like a smell, a sound, a something visual. Like, is it dirty? Is it clean? What does Portugal look like in 1536? We're in a square. I have no context. So for the whole reading, I was a little bit lost as to where I'm picturing the characters and what's going on around them. Is it quiet? Is it noisy? So that was one thing. But then following from that, with the question, who taps the shoulder? Who taps my shoulder? Is it choosing a cabbage? Oh my God, I love that line. I absolutely love that line. As if like that, all of a sudden now I'm like right there, like as if choosing a cabbage just made me smile and feel like, okay. I'm getting a sense there.
So I'm going to agree and disagree at the same time. So I also loved the opening with the dates. Important because for me, it just grounded me instantly, and it sets up the idea again that there is going to be this contrast. And by contrasting the dates, you also get a sense there's going to be a contrast between the Jewish and Christian thing. And if you know history, of course, you have a really good idea of what's going to be going on here. But even if you don't, it's setting that up for you. And I also really quite liked the idea of setting up with the question. There's a sort of a mystery, what's going on with this blacksmith. So for that worked with me. And I'm also agreeing with Donna, where I thought this is a place for just a line or two more. And again, I'm always on with people. I think sometimes when we say, oh, I want more setting, they feel like, oh, I have to go on for paragraphs. Just one or two more details about the setting, I think would just help ground people just that tiny bit more. I wasn't crazy about the cabbage line. For me, it didn't work. And I think that's a really good example of one person's going to love it and one person's not. So my advice for Bonni, or for anyone who gets contrasting feedback and they don't know what to do with it, is do a little bit of a group. See, you know, if other people bump on it, and if a lot of people are bumping, that may be the clue that it's throwing people. But if, you know, it's just a couple people, then it's the author's choice. And if you love that line, then keep it. So that's always my detail there. I loved some of the details like onion breath and crusty wart on her cheek, Bob. Like that was just super visual. And I also loved right after that, there's a line where she says, at least Isaac isn't with me. He's 9, but I still never know what my little brother might say. I love that because I just felt like in that, again, short economy of space, we have a sense that she absolutely loves her brother. Like the affection comes through in that line. And yet at the same time, the irritation comes through in that same little bit. So for me, that established a lot in a very small amount of space.
Mm-hmm. Can I jump in on the cabbage thing too? Just a thought. So, and that one bounced off me as well. I really I like the language, but at the same time, if I'm picking a cabbage, I'm like picking it up and turning it around to look at it. And so it was the trying to imagine how that translates in the physical world was, I think, where I bumped off that. So if anybody's trying to decide if, you know, if it's a simile, if a simile works, like as or than, right? If you're trying to figure out if a simile works, then try physically doing it. Like try doing the thing you're comparing it to and see if it still feels right. Or if you can picture that actually happening. And in this case, I think that is why it was a little bit jarring. Was it's a, you know, it's a super fun visual, but it doesn't feel quite right in terms of like the physicality of it.
All right, so clearly now I've just been outed as the least
you don't like cabbage
oriented. I don't like cabbages. How about like a melon then? Because I was imagining you tap it like a melon, right? So yeah, maybe there weren't melons back at that. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah,
honestly, it was a similar thing for me as if tapping, because I wouldn't tap a cabbage. I don't.
Okay.
Maybe people do. Maybe they're supposed to check and see if it's like light and fluffy or a nice dense set of leaves. I don't know. Somebody who knows more about cabbage picking than I needs to maybe weigh in on that. But
I'm pretty sure cabbage is not supposed to be fluffy. I'm just going to go there. All right.
Okay.
Rolling on to page 2. Any comments, ladies?
Wait. I'm not quite. Oh.
Go ahead. Sorry. I rolled your past.
I was just going to say, like, because, so right here, you already know, so she knows who this woman is, as all devout new Christians should. This is what the older woman says to the young girl on page 1. And also, I really like that because it got me thinking, all right, we know right now that this young lady is in transition from one faith to another, which again, as Eileen said earlier, like the smallest number of words, some people would take that and they would put so many words around it. And this is beautiful. One sentence is like 12 words. You already know who I am, as all devout new Christians should. Anyway, I just wanted to say that really also grounded me in where the story is probably going. There's going to be conflict about what's going on with this new faith that this family has just assumed. There, that's all I wanted to say.
Bonni does a really nice job throughout this whole piece. It's a really masterful example of that trusting the reader. And I had this discussion with someone else the other day, whereas I think sometimes we think, I have to make sure I explain it. So it would be like, you already know who I am, as all devout new Christians should. At that time, we were transitioning from being Jewish into Christian because this was going on and there was this and there was this happening in the church and there was these, like a lot of people feel they have to explain all of that. And you don't. You'd actually be surprised at how little information you need in opening scenes for the reader to follow along. Now, there may be a scene later, and of course, we only have the first 3 pages, where Bonni has this main character describe the political situation. And again, you know, where this was a time where, if I'm remembering right, we're talking about the Inquisition, which makes me want to break into a song or something like that. But we're basically, if people were not switching to the Christian faith, they were in deep, deep trouble. So there may be a scene coming down where she gives more of that history, but she's trusting her reader here in these opening pages that she's giving them just enough to follow along.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I thought the last little bit on that page was particularly powerful because she's that it's a conversation between this woman and the child, and it's questioning her about how to do things. It's not like, are you following the rules? It's not telling us what's going on. It's really showing us. So she's saying, you know, tell me, do you add milk to the sauce? And Maria's like, that would be meat with milk. It's a trick to find out if we followed the old laws. I'm too clever for her. I don't prepare the dish, Senora. So it's this nice melding of like, these are what the rules would be. I know what they are. We don't necessarily do that, but I can't say that. So here's what I'm going to say instead. And so it does give us a really, I mean, it gives us a really clear look into the conflict that the character is experiencing. She's not going to outright lie, but she's also not wanting to get in trouble and or get her family in trouble. And she wants to make sure that this fiction that they're living is sort of kept up. And so, yeah, I think that was a really, really strong passage of just dropping us right into what the conflict is and what we're hiding and from whom. Yeah.
And the other piece I think that I really love is she's 12 years old. So we already know she's a clever 12-year-old.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say that. We're in agreement at long last. The cabbage thing we didn't like, but wait, you know, we're in agreement on that. Yeah, it tells us a lot about that character.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing I really liked about this passage too was just the way that the dialogue is woven in with bits of action and visual cues. So we can see this scene unfold. It's a really strong example of how to do that really well. So, you know, melding the speech with the actions and just really letting us follow along. Yeah, that was great.
Mm-hmm.
So now I am going to roll to page 2. And just sort of talk. One of the things that I noted at the top of the page is she has the line, really, she scratches her ear, well, I would like to invite your family to dine with us this Friday night, my dear. Will you be able to join us? I might just change that up a little bit so you don't have the echo of the two us's quite so close together. So I'd like your family to dine with ours this Friday night. Would you be able to join us? Or, you know, it doesn't have to be that, but something to avoid that. And word echoes are one of those things that I never worry about until the final round of revisions because it's just cleaning up. But they are really good to catch and sort of eliminate where you can. In terms of resources, the Pro Writing Aid, we have a coupon for that in our section. This is one of the things it'll do a search for. So if you're not good at catching it in your own writing, that's a great way to sort of find those. And then if I scroll down a little bit, what you're seeing is this woman has continued to sort of press this young girl and trying to trap her. Her eyes wide. Oh, really? On Fridays, she says. She trapped me. What can I do? I cough while I try and think. My only comment there is I wondered if we could just get maybe one more beat or a little line about her emotions to sort of establish the stakes. Because again, depending what the reader's knowledge is of this time period, which again, I'm thinking is probably not high because they're middle grade readers. So they're probably not up necessarily on that historical period. It's just to know the stakes. So if she gets caught, what does that mean? If this woman has truly trapped her, you know, is this a life or death thing, or is this like she's going to be grounded? And the reader may not know here. So just a bit more about an emotion in that moment, I think would make it be like, oh, okay, we're in trouble. You ladies?
Agreed.
I had put a check mark on, you know, she's getting herself out of these troubles with these questions. And I loved when she says, she gets asked another question and Maria says, yes, Signora, el Dio, help me. Which I don't know, it made me smile. Mm-hmm. Because again, we're seeing that like she is under pressure and, you know, and Bonni has expressed that in 4 words. I love it.
And I think one of the things that's really good to mention in this piece, because again, it's coming through very well in 3 pages, and it's worthwhile for other people to think about, is the idea of character agency. That is that this young girl in many ways is driving the scene. That doesn't mean that she has to always be right. She can be wrong because she does do a misstep here. but she's doing something and that's what drives the action. So she's responding to this woman, and then that's leading this woman to take new actions, and she's then having to respond. So her brother or someone else isn't coming in to answer those questions or try, like her mom doesn't show up and get her out of this situation. This is the main character having to take agency and do something in that situation. So character agency is all about that idea of the character being the one that drives action. So things don't just happen to them, they happen to the world around them. And Bonnie's done a nice job with that.
Yeah.
The only other thing I flagged on this page is just to make things just a tiny little bit clear. So this conversation ends, and she's done a good job. And she says at the very bottom, to my relief, she's off before I even curtsy. No wonder Mama warned me to stay away from her. I almost lost. I just felt like there needed to, it wasn't necessarily clear, lost what.
Oh, I loved that actually. I just put a check mark and put nice foreshadowing, like what is there to lose? So that's interesting.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting cycle because it is, I almost won that one, I'll win this game, I almost lost. Like, it is very clear that she's viewing this all as a game, and that's what's kind of keeping her focused and in it. But it's clear to us as, you know, outside readers, knowing that this is a pretty serious game. So yeah, like I think Eileen mentioned earlier, Donna, that just we need to know the stakes. It needs to be more clear in terms of I almost lost, and you know, and that would have cost us everything, or you know, whatever it is, like something that indicates what that loss will mean.
And to what, sorry, Eileen, maybe you can answer this, or no, I guess it's for Bonnie to answer, but I'm reading this, like, I don't read a lot of middle grade, but I have read a lot of middle grade because I've got a kid who I read a lot to and with. This is not reading to me like middle grade at all. This is reading like I'm interested in this, and in a way that there's so much depth and richness in it that it feels too complicated for what I assume a middle grade is, which is more like Captain Underpants.
I'm just trying to mesh this story with Captain.
I know it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Which also, you know, it may speak to my very limited knowledge of middle grade.
You had boys in your home.
I
would say
boys. Yeah.
I mean, there is a wide range in middle grade, and I would say certainly the topic area is something that I would see in middle grade. Some of this richness I would say I have seen in middle grade. I think it's a fine line, and partly because middle grade does span a wide range. So when we say middle grade, and in fact, sometimes you'll hear the term, is that upper middle grade or lower middle grade? Because technically, quote unquote, YA fiction starts at 14. But we do know that readers tend to read up. So for example, this main character is 12, which tells me people reading this book are primarily going to be that sort of anywhere between 8 and 12. And this, I think, would be too high of a reading level for someone who was 8. Mm-hmm. It's definitely capturing it reads a little bit more almost later to me. I almost wondered about making the character 13 or 14, just to age her up slightly. And part of that is I have limited experience with middle grade. I wrote one middle grade series, so I wrote 3 books in that area. And one of the things I remembered is my editor always talking to me, strangely enough, going back to this learn, is what words are they going to know and how are they going to think of it? So when it says, no wonder Mama warned me to stay away from her, I almost lost. Like, are little kids first going to think of lost as in getting lost versus to like lose a game? So well, you know, which one are they going to think about in any one time? And she also, my editor at that time, was always like, when in doubt, put in more dialogue tags. Because as experienced readers, we automatically know when you have a line that says, yes, Signora, El Dio, help me. Then there's a line break and there's a new line. Is he to be an altar boy? Question mark. Line break, no, Signora. And then another word. As readers who are now, I'm not going to say how many years I've been reading, let's just say a while. We know when there's a line break and a new line, that means a new speaker is speaking. But keep in mind, these are people who've been reading for like a year. Mm-hmm. So putting in more dialogue tags can often help them keep track of where they are and who's speaking. And that's something that as you go along, you learn more and more. So depending where Bonni pictures the reader being is something to consider.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, one really good tool, if you're not sure, there's a couple different ways you can test it, but there's a really good online tool that's free. If you go to writingtester.com, you can actually click on their tool and you can enter a sample from your manuscript and click test, and it will tell you this is at a grade 3 level, the readability score is, you know, whatever, and you'll have a sense of how easy to read is this, and it analyzes all those words for you, and it tells you based on the vocabulary that most students are learning at those different grade levels, this is where it's placed. And so it's a really smart idea if you're writing anything for kids, or even anything that is targeting readers who might not have English as their first language. It's a really good idea to use some of these checking tools just to get a sense of what grade level you're writing at. And then if you know that your audience is going to be, you know, 8 to 12, that's going to be 3 to 6, 3 to 7 in terms of grade level. Yeah, something like that. And so knowing that you're in that right sphere, and that will also tell you, you know, are you upper or lower middle grade? Are you upper middle grade, but for reluctant readers? Because it's all over the map in terms of where you go with this. And yeah, just keeping that in mind is great. We'll put the link in below the video so that if anybody wants to find that checker tool easily, they can.
All right, now I'm going to roll us into page 3. So one of the things that for me would just be, again, because we're earlier in this piece, is the piece starts at home, a bowl is set out for me on the edge of the kitchen table. Luizia fills it for my breakfast and goes back to tending the outdoor hearth while Mama and Grandma. Then it scrolls on later, and about halfway down the page is a line where the mother says, "Yes, you always do," says Mama. Our maid is one of the old Christians Mama trusts. I just would move up much earlier in the piece that Luizia is the maid into that kind of first section, because the reader doesn't know who that is. So Luizia, our maid, fills it for my breakfast. Something like that just right off the bat lets me know who she is.
Yeah, definitely agreed on that. But otherwise, I think it was, yeah, it flows nicely. We're getting a sense of who people are, who the characters are, and kind of fleshing out that crowd a little bit more.
Yeah, and I had in here, which you mentioned earlier, I can't remember which one of you did, but the balance between dialogue and sort of lines of narration and description and telling us what's happened, there's just a really nice balance. And I think sometimes it's hard, and I will sometimes see in some pieces of writing, and I'll put the note, this reads almost script-like. So you'll have this, you know, rapid fire back and forth between 2 or 3 characters, and then a big chunk of exposition, and then another section of dialogue that's back and forth. But putting those in between allows you to just sort of create a nice natural rhythm. This is not a high action scenes, and it doesn't have to be. What needs to have is conflict. And I do think there is conflict, particularly in that opening scene with the older woman. You don't need to see them fighting it out. She doesn't need to, you know, dodge through the market, you know, barely getting away. Like, the fact that it's this verbal parry works particularly well. There's a little bit less conflict here in the second part of this scene where she's dealing with the parents, but it's still, there's back and forth and communication happening, which I really liked.
And then there's the setup for what's going to happen at dinner time. The very last line of the 3 pages is, oh, she says, I rehearsed the story of Senora Romero to myself to tell at the midday meal. Everyone will congratulate me and see how grown up I am. To which, of course, I think, ooh, no, something's going to go wrong.
It's not going to go well.
So, yeah. Anyway, so the page ends with that setup for the conflict, I think. Maybe.
Yes, no, it does. Like, yeah. And again, I think sometimes in this marketability where we're always hearing, like, you know, action, 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 people feel like they have to have things happening. But one of the things, and in fact, is that what isn't happening is just people sitting and talking. Like, they're doing stuff in this scene. Their food's being prepared, they're dishing the dishes. things are happening, and that I think is really useful. My only, and this is such a tiny little thing, is they're taking turns scrubbing and rinsing, and she says the edges of my cap are as wet as the clothes. And I just wondered how her head got as wet. Like, that's some serious, vigorous laundry doing. Like, I totally buy that her apron would be soaked or the cuffs of her shirt would be wet, but the idea that her hat or her cap was wet, just for me was one thing where I was like, that's just a lot of splashing. But that just may be that I don't do my laundry with enough intention.
Nor do you check your cabbages vigorously enough.
No, I do not. Okay. But I would say in terms of just general feedback to wrap up for Bonni, I think this is a really strong piece. It's clearly, to me, it's been well polished. I have no sense that this is an early draft. Lots of details. I think there's a little bit of room in the very opening for just maybe a few more details around the setting to kind of give us that little piece. I think, you know, going through and looking at just tiny little tweaks, so copy edit kind of stuff. So looking for repeated words. There was a place where I think there was a question mark missing, things like that, just those kind of tiny little details, and something like the Pro Writer Aid could be helpful with that. And then lastly, just thinking about where this is going to fit in the middle grade genre, and where 3 pages is, so I'm very reluctant to say it reads too old for a middle grade, but I think it is definitely just pushing that line a tiny little bit. And the resource Crystal mentioned would be a great one to take a look at to see whether or not you want to swap out maybe just some vocabulary terms, or looking at taking some of those longer, more complex sentences and breaking them into 2 sentences, for example. Anything else to wrap us up?
No, I had one question, which I should just ask Bonni in GLIP or something, but I wasn't sure if it was intentional or not. Breakfast is written as break fast, which of course would probably be the origin of breakfast, breaking fast in the morning. And it was one of those other pieces that, if that's the intention of it, I love it. I don't know how that, like, again, that speaks to me as an older reader. So anyway, but I don't know if it's a typo or if it was intended as break fast, and I don't know if that even matters. Did you read it as a typo, or did you read it? I read
it as a typo. I corrected it.
And I checkmarked it and thought I really liked it. So that's real. So there's a word that I guess, yeah.
And again, there I would go for, is a middle grade reader going to have any idea of that, or is it going to confuse them?
Exactly. Which is why I say, as an older reader, I really liked it, because I made an assumption that it was giving me more information.
But if I was going to give it as more information, I would change the line to, currently right now it reads, Luizia fills it for my break fast, 2 words, and goes back to tending the outdoor hearth. I would do it, Luizia filled it for the breaking of my fast, or something where it was very clear that it's meant to be a separate terminology, where again, a high level middle grade kid, which there are lots of them, there are a lot of really bright little kids, you don't have to write down to them, will be like, oh, breaking my fast. I wonder if that's where breakfast comes from. Like, they'll start to piece that together. But just break fast, I don't know if that would do it.
That's why it was a question for me, because I wasn't sure if it was a type or not.
And I think that's one thing to just keep in mind, like, as you're looking at refining that and hitting the language levels, is to make sure you don't strip out anything that would be a challenge, because it can be tempting to make sure that everything that's in there is something they would understand. But I mean, kids, especially in young readers, are absorbing phenomenal amounts of new language every day. And you also want to make them stretch a little bit when they read it, and give them the opportunity to get curious about something and go look it up, or discuss it or ask about it. And so, yeah, I think just as a cautionary measure, we can overcompensate in the other direction. So, you know, running the analysis, seeing where your levels are at, and then you can even do, there's a couple checker tools that will tell you how many different words you've used and what levels each of those words is at. And so if you're not sure about something, you know, you want about 10% new content is, I believe, the stat that we used to use when we were analyzing things for our publishing company. So, you know, you want about 10% potentially new stuff in there, or new concepts. They may know the words, but, you know, combining the different way is actually a positive thing.
Perfect. And that's good news for all of us. Put us all good to have a goal to stretch our readers a little bit. So thank you to Bonni, and thank you to Donna and Crystal. And we'll see you guys back here at the Creative Academy.